psychologists have been playing with this. There was another case in Philadelphia where a bunch of people saw out their window someone beat up and kill a woman, and they put her in the trunk of a car parked on the street, and the whole neighborhood didn't report it for days until people started smelling the dead body, odor from the car. There's another case of that kind of thing. But the reason I'm, the quiz question I pose is, what would you do? And what do you think you ought to have done? Kant tells us that there's a thing called a categorical imperative. That as sane human beings, and yes, you have to be sane, rational, not only do we know what a triangle is, but we also know what is morally right and morally wrong. Well, the problem with my example, though, is if you were in Saudi Arabia and you saw a bunch of men pounding on a woman's car, pulling her out of the car, at least a few years ago, I think things have changed. But at the time, that would have been the moral police. And it was illegal for a woman to drive a car, or at least be in the car by herself. She needed to have a male family member responsible for her. And so if you were in Saudi Arabia in a different cultural environment, you might even be on the side of the police and go get her. She should not be out here driving. A woman, Where's her husband, or chaperone or whatever. In which case Kant is wrong. It's not a universal categorical imperative. It's a cultural categorical imperative. So when we go back and think about, what's going to happen in the next philosophical generation or group of generations, is they're going to realize that this structuring of our experience is certainly the answer to that question. Hume's question, right? It's social. Knowledge is social. And different societies have different answers to those different questions. You see where that leads to the dilemma we're in today, where we've got multiple opinions about something. And Hegel points out it's not all this answer is true and this answer is false, and there's a fight between the true and the false. What you have is this cultural point of view is true. From this cultural point of view, it's also true. So you have multiple narratives, multiple truths in conflict with one another, right? Now this one wins, now this one wins. This one wins. Now something new comes out of all of this, and you get a new understanding of things as a result of the conflict. In other words, it's just like evolution. Well, Hegel is the one that really gives us the idea of history. As we all teach, everybody's supposed to study history. History's evolved, of course, a little bit, basically. How should we teach history? Some people think we should teach it this way, other people think we should teach it this way. Well, notice, this is why Hegel is such an answer for me, because the template that he gives us about the sociality of reason and the nature of such conflict answers this dilemma. I mean, you can explore lots of different aspects of it. So just because Hegel gives us this answer in basically 1807, doesn't mean that's the end of it. right? We've got, okay, well, what happened, with Kierkegaard? What happened with Nietzsche? What happened with Karl Marx, right? What happened with John Stuart Mill? So there's philosophies that have taken this, template and gone on with it to expand on it. And that's where we go next, right? To get a sense of the various answers based on this Hegelian response, right? But the thing that Hegel at least has given us is, we're no longer worried about metaphysics in that sense anymore. Now we've got our answer. It is the way we interpret the world that we're dealing with, and we not only have our biologies that give us our gestalts and things, and our parental environment that will give us our psychological dilemmas, because we grew up with a mom that wouldn't let us do what we wanted to do, or whatever, right? Or made us do something we didn't want to do, right? Etc. Yeah, we've got all of that, but we also have a culture based on a language, and the languages are evolving and complex. Look at what happened with the word woke just recently. It's actually an old word, but it came back to the surface and used in a particular sense. Within months, it was changed to be something else, and then within months again, it changed to still be something else. Now we don't really use it that much, so it went through a couple of phases and went out. So language is very dynamic. And by the way, when we think about our social media and all of the controversies that we're faced with today, thanks to all of those different kinds of silos and things, we've got names for them. I'm a normie. And I remember years ago reading the book, Kill All Normies. Had me worried for a few minutes. I listened to the author. She's Irish, by the way, so it's kind of fun. I like accents and so on. But I'm a normie. That's, and the idea that the black web or the dark web, there's a undercurrent there that, they're all in agreement, kill all normies, they need to get rid of us, That could be funny, or you could take it seriously. But in any case, it worried me for about 5 minutes. But the more I ask people about it, the fewer know about it, so I'm okay with that. Are you having fun thinking about the quiz question? How many of you are going to get out of the car? You're going to get out of the car?
I feel like I would get out and be like, hey, stop, and then I wouldn't try to fight them, but if sometimes people just leave after having anybody else just recognize what they're doing is wrong.
Well, good for you.
And if that didn't happen, if people turn around and okay, I get back in my car and I call 911.
Yeah, usually when I ask that question of a class, the women are, I'm not getting out. No way. I did have one female student though, said, getting out of the car, taking my shotgun out, I'm going to blow their, That's unusual. That's Alaska too, I think, where you have that. I don't know if you're allowed a shotgun in Detroit. That's kind of an odd situation.
Well, usually, a major factor would be: is it here or is it in Detroit?
Yeah.
Because if it's in Detroit, I'd be probably a little more hesitant to take a gun out and just shoot them.
Yeah. Would you call it a riot? I don't think so.
Argument, maybe? 95.
So actually, this news item actually says that they were actually cheering. It's not my fault. So that was a real story. What would you do? I think I would have gotten out of my car and instantly peed my pants once I realized what I had done. I'm too quick to do things like that. Not enough thought, you're going to die. However, but yeah, Kant is interesting in arguing that we ought to know what's right and what's wrong. Of course, that becomes much more complex once we introduce the unknown problem of, well, what about your cultural bias? What about your sexual bias? I mean, if you're a male or a female, depending, that will make a difference, I think, in the way most people would answer a question like that. And it's interesting because I think I've mentioned Eve, the book Eve, by Kat Ohanan. Remember the old expression, women and children first. When the ship is sinking and you're loading the rowboats. This happened with the Titanic. First all the wealthy people got on the rowboats. Then they said, okay, women and children first. After they saved the millionaires. That could have been funny. No one's laughing. My humor is just wrong, I guess. But in any case, save the women and children first. Why? Why do we want to save the women first? Why do enemy soldiers rape women, kill the men and rape the women? Similar question, actually, right? Any ideas? It's universal. Well, unless you're in the U.S. Army, in which case you're not supposed to do that. Maybe other European armies as well, I suppose. It's just true, right?
Bloodline?
Why?
Bloodline?
Bloodline. Yeah, I mean, if you think of what's going on, for example, in Sudan, they're killing the men. Some of the women they're killing, but mostly they're raping the women. So these are Arabs raping women in Darfur, that area, I believe, basically. Yes, Chelsea?
I mean, they see the woman as property, possibly.
Yeah. Well, it's probably still property in most of the world, I suppose. I mean, that's one of the questions. Why is it that feminism really took off in Northern European countries and the United States?
The wealth.
Pay
Wealth.
more taxpayers.
Wealth?
I mean, when you're not starving to death in the streets, you can worry about getting rights and all that. Whereas if you have no food, no money, you're in a constant war. It's like you're not going to worry about, oh, well, should we treat this person more fairly when you're only looking after yourself?
Freedom of speech. Because some places it's not, like some places the culture is not to question anything. So if you're taught, women have a certain place or property.
Depends where in the United States you are, actually, right?
True.
That's,
Well, not just
as Maine goes, so goes the country. Well, but no, not necessarily. it's kind of interesting. I suspect, though, that if you look at our language, everything in English is neuter, except for actual males and females. So everything in this room is a thing, and we would describe that as neuter in gender, right? It's more difficult in French. If you're speaking French, there's only two genders. So everything is either masculine or feminine, even if it's a tree. Le fromage, everything is, that's cheese. So everything is sexed in a way. And there was a French sociologist, and Eve would point out how different the female body is, but I'm not going to be able to remember his name. Oh, so, Bourdieu, Pierre Bourdieu. So, how is the masculine so dominant? Well, when they do a study in foreign languages, if they have feminine nouns, they treat those objects as if they're feminine. And if they have masculine nouns, they treat those nouns as if they're masculine. In German as well. German has more neuter words, but it's fascinating. So my thinking is that English had an impact in making it easier for feminism to occur. There's actually a movement in Spanish-speaking countries to add a neuter, because of course Spanish has just masculine and feminine, and they're having difficulties emphasizing that women ought to be treated equally, and they